East Anglia is an often overlooked part of Old England, tucked off to the side, usually far out of the way of American travelers. In medieval times, these counties were mysterious, filled with swamps that have long since been drained, but over 1,000 years ago, legends of demons and ogres hiding in the reeds seemed very real to the local people here. It was the center of a monastic community, centered around Ely, Cambridge, and Bury St. Edmunds, as well as around Norwich, the last of which became the epicenter for some of the worst anti-Jewish violence seen in the British Isles up until the more organized pogroms about a century afterwards. In the year 1132, just outside of the Norwich town center, a young boy was born named William. When he was born, his mother had the dream of a bloody fish, and his father translated this as meaning that William would be a holy man by the age of 12. And at the same time, Norwich had a new and thriving Jewish community. Now, as a people at this time in Europe, the Jews were being persecuted all across the continent, but the royalty in East Anglia and the rest of England sort of saw them as prospective customers. They kept to themselves. It was a relatively small population, but they contributed a lot to the local economy. So naturally, they built a sort of relationship with the local aristocratic people, the sheriff, and some of the priests as well. And then one day in the year 1144, a man is said to have approached William and given him an offer to become the cook for the archprior. Now, William, being a good 12-year-old kid, decided to tell the stranger that he couldn't do this immediately and he had to take it to his mother and request her permission. But money talked, and she allowed him to go and be this cook. But later that night, or very soon after, William was killed, and his body was found on top of Mousehold Heath, a hill overlooking the city of Norwich. And back at the time when it was cleared of forests, it would have given a very beautiful panoramic view of the Norwich Cathedral and the castle and medieval city. He was murdered pretty brutally. That much is what is known as fact. And he had a wooden easel stuffed in his mouth, and he was tied up and had his hands behind his back. Nuns identified his body, and his parents had to come. They recognized it and say, yes, it was William of Norwich. Now, the church convened in the Norwich Cathedral. It was basically a community discussion of what happened to this boy. And immediately people started blaming the Jews. They said that it was part of their tradition that they would have to use human blood to make matzah. And anybody who has even a basic understanding of Jewish law and Jewish ritual knows that's not true. A man named Thomas of Monmouth came along and spent around 30 years collecting this testimony from so-called converted Jews in Cambridge and around Bury St. Edmunds. And essentially the theory is, back in these days, monasteries had power, political power. And in Bury St. Edmunds, you had the Edmunds the Martyr, and they had a very large pilgrimage going there. And if you had pilgrims, you had money. So Thomas of Monmouth worked together with the monks of Norwich to try to propagate this myth that William was this holy sacred martyr. This was obviously not promoted by the royalty or by any of the priests, but it was still promoted by the people. Fertile ground because the people saw this new community forming around the castle, and they were just mistrustful of them because they kept to their own, and it was a natural, easy target. Particularly St. William of Norwich, who was competing with St. Bury in terms of influence and popularity for the local pilgrimage. For the sake of going more in depth, I should mention a few other details and facts about this case, as well as other blood libel cases in Britain. Firstly, the cult of St. William wasn't very popular with any of the monks in Norfolk, and around 1146, a knight that was fresh back from the Second Crusade murdered a Jewish banker named de Saulles because he was in debt to him. Now, his name was Sir Simon de Nouvier, and stories spread about how he was stricken in the Holy War and slowly made his way back home to his family, really building him up as a local hero character, and the locals weren't happy that his sentence was too harsh. 2 years later, he was finally tried for the murder, and East Anglians weren't particularly happy, probably because they saw the murder of a Jewish banker as probably like a good thing, particularly when done by someone of his status. He's a veteran. He can do no wrong. We see sort of similarities between the 1100s and modern day, minimizing the fact that this guy just murdered a banker. The fact that the law protected the Jews at all upset a lot of these people in East Anglia. So soon, a Jew named Eleazar was killed by followers of this murderous knight, and afterwards the king just happened to visit the local area on a regular tour. And while he was there, the Jews sent an emissary to meet with him and demand that this crime be punished because the knight was being protected. So the bishop spoke to the king, and rather than taking the side of the law, this bishop really created a straw man argument that William was killed 5 years prior, absolving the locals from any real responsibility. And this was around 1150, some years after William's death, when the Bishop William de Tubeville asked an otherwise unknown monk named Thomas of Monmouth to write an account of his life and martyrdom. So at this point, the monk was trying to turn William, who was pretty much unknown and unheard of, and even in this part of the world, into a larger thing. The cult of William didn't really develop in tandem exactly just because they were looking for a rival with St. Bury, but it sort of became that. But the initial cause was just to wash their hands of the fact that this knight killed a banker. After half a decade, William was exhumed from the monks' cemetery and moved progressively to higher places in the Norwich Cathedral, corresponding to basically how much the hatred of the Jews was growing. Locals began placing long lists of miracles along with Thomas's writings, particularly describing healing and the sighting of lights around the body. The book William of Norwich by Thomas of Monmouth is basically just a long list of miracles, along with a few of the historical aspects about his life. So Thomas admits in his own book that many in the clergy were against this superstition. In particular, the prior Elias was incensed by it, and in his book Thomas of Monmouth relies heavily on testimony of a Jew named Theobald, who was pretty eager to be accepted in the Christian community, likely because he saw the writing on the walls for the Jews. Now remember this man named Theobald, this Jew who wanted to be accepted into the Christian community, because he comes into play later in the story. The men who republished Thomas's book in the 1890s for academic reasons said that the death could be attributed to a number of things, because they did think that William was a real person. There's plenty of historical evidence to suggest that he existed. He could have died in any kind of an accident, or it could have been committed by a Christian just to blame on the Jews. There's a possibility that a Jewish man murdered him, but that the community covered it up because they feared that they would be blamed as a group. And the authors suggested that their own opinion was that Theobald, the convert, was actually the culprit, and that he came forward with all of these fanciful stories of his own actions to be accepted into the Christian community even faster. Folklorist Joseph Jacobs also has an interesting theory. In 1897, he pointed out that the family had a premonition of his holiness. So basically, as soon as he was born, the family was saying, "Our son will be a holy martyr." In fact, they spoke about it pretty far before his death. So Jacobs points out that to be buried in Thorpe Wood, the Jews would have had to secretly move this body throughout the entire Christian part of Norwich, rather than bury it in a cellar or a local well. So Jacobs proposes that his own family crucified him in a religious fervor, and he probably died of shock, which is why he was found at or near the surface. In 1967, it was suggested that he was killed by a pedophile. Thomas remarks in his book that he was found wearing shoes and a jacket, implying that he was nude apart from this. And he claimed to have heard from the Jewish community that the man enticed Williams with food, and indeed William worked at the church for a cook, and this man who enticed him with food never appears anywhere else in Thomas's work. So it seems like he was enticed, lured into a basement, and we can kind of gather what followed. After Thomas's book began to circulate, other towns hopped on the bandwagon with their own saints. In 1168, Harold of Gloucester was found floating in a river. Local monks tried to identify the marks on his body as being consistent with William, but nobody ever really ran with it, and the cult of Harold never really took off. But in 1181, a bleached skeleton of a child was found nailed to a tree in the style of a crucifix, and this became Robert of Bury, another would-be saint, literally right across the way from Norwich, and ironically in the part of town where the cult of William was developing incidentally to rival the cult of Bury. The most famous local cult to surface was Little St. Hugh of Lincoln. At age 8 or 9, he was found about a month after his 1255 disappearance at the bottom of a well. The story spread was that he was enticed to a home, fed with milk and sweets, and occupied until representatives from every Jewish community in England could be gathered to torture him in the same manner as Jesus. A monk also claimed he was disemboweled, quote, "It is said for the purpose of their magic arts." This is some serious Borat logic. Now, in this instance, a Jew named Copin was captured by the brother of the Bishop of Lincoln and tortured. He confessed only after being offered immunity, but the entire community of England was conveniently implicated. The king went back on the promise of amnesty, arriving in Lincoln and ordering Copin executed. He also tortured and hanged 18 other Jews outside the Tower of London because they refused to admit their guilt. Another 71 were sentenced to death, but good-hearted folks stepped in including Richard of Cornwall and the Franciscan Order, sort of ensuring that they were released. After this, you had an incident at the York Castle, which I think is an incredibly crucial moment in Jewish history in Western Europe, but not many people really teach about it. It's the same story as Masada, almost. They were surrounded by an angry mob of people demanding that they tell the story and the truth that they had murdered this young boy to make matzah out of his blood, which was obviously untrue, and they were being told that they would be tortured into conversion or into death. So most of them chose suicide. Very few of them actually met the hands of the angry mob, and this was thanks to the fact that the local sheriff knew they were innocent and decided to shelter them. In fact, most of the aristocracy knew they were innocent as well. The king, Henry III, realized he could profit from all this chaos, and any Jew caught committing any offense, no matter how slight, were now totally indebted to the crown and owed all of their wealth to the royalty. Some years later, all the Jews were expelled from Europe, either to Spain, Italy, or somewhere else. What became of these folk saints, though? Virtually nothing is known of Harold or Robert, but St. Hugh still has a shrine in the Lincoln Cathedral. Traces of William's shrine can be seen in Norwich, but during religious upheavals in the following centuries, most of their icons were smashed and their bones were scattered in the fields around the churches. Decent rood screens depicting William can be seen at St. John's Church in Garboldisham, at the Holy Trinity Church in Loddon, southeast Norfolk, where the artistry appears almost cartoonish compared to other rood screens. Sadly, even today, if you Google the words Loddon and Jews, you'll find a neo-Nazi website pushing this story, and also that of St. Hugh is fact. He's depicted here in Loddon most brutally, I think. It's a very startling icon, to say the least. St. William's Church in Worstead has another noteworthy example. Noteworthy because Worstead still has a reputation as a Catholic pilgrimage spot, close to the town of Walsham, where a contemporary Marian apparition sort of appeared to the villagers. The village also had a lively Flemish community, explaining some of the iconography and its distinctive look. The church at Litcham had a scholarly guild around the 14th century, which sort of revived St. William for a little while as their patron. And it's in these villages that the rood screens miraculously managed to survive for so many centuries. In reality, they were painted centuries after the death of William, during a period of particularly bad anti-Semitism in Europe. They were blaming the Jewish people for the plague. The Jews arrived basically with the Normans in 1066 and first started facing actual concerted persecution with the death of William of Norwich. Although this was quieted for a while, it remained active locally as a way to justify the killing of various members of the Jewish community at the hands of anti-Semitic peasants. In 1190 came the massacre at the Castle of York. A century later, they were expelled by the crown with Edward I's Edict of Expulsion. However, the Black Death emerged in Europe about 50 years later, and the Jews were used as a scapegoat, along with the Roma. From this point on, they became perpetually hated in Europe, whereas before the church was more or less okay with them, believing they would have them converted eventually. It would seem as though the human mind has not changed much in the last 1500 years. You have the same level of scapegoating, the same whataboutisms, and the same need to blame somebody for something that they clearly did not do. The idea that the Hollywood elite drink the blood of children, the idea that adrenochrome is used to keep people perpetually young in satanic rituals, these things are still around, and I know people who believe them. But it's necessary to sit down and look at your own actions and the consequences they may one day begin to cause. This is why history is needed. We have the same thought patterns in our heads that we had 30,000 years ago because our brains have not evolved, at least not in that period of time. We're the same people we were back when William died. We're the same people we were back when Jesus was crucified. And the logic we use is the same. Don't fall for the same arguments that have been used for tens of centuries. Think for yourself, let calmer heads prevail, and you will come out on top. Finally, I ought to end here in Earlham Cemetery. In the shadow of the Norwich Cathedral where William's shrine once stood are the graves of 17 Jews found at the bottom of a well in the early 2000s. They dated from around the same time as William of Norwich, indicating that they died at a very early pogrom. Years after their discovery beneath a shopping center across the road from the castle, they were laid to rest in an unmarked grave near the synagogue. And to end on a positive note, buried elsewhere in the Earlham Cemetery are British RAF pilots who died fighting the Battle of Britain, are members of the Polish armed forces who died helping in World War II, and also overlooking the graves of the 17 men, women, and children found at the bottom of the well with fractures in their skull are Jewish members of a battalion of the British military fighting fascism in World War II.